Cashflow Ninja, the podcast sharing how to create and grow income streams and manage, multiply, and protect your wealth in the new economy. Are you tired of trading your time for money? Do you desire freedom today instead of retirement in 10, 20, or 30 years? I'm MC Laubscher, and this is the Cashflow Ninja. Hello, Cashflow Ninjas. MC Laubscher here, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Ninja. I've got a fantastic show for you today. In today's show, I'm joined by Ashley and Kyle Wilson. They're entrepreneurs and investors. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of spending some time with you both at some events over the course of the past year and gotten to know you guys. You're up to a lot of exciting stuff and have a phenomenal just background and how you approach business that I'm excited to share with my listeners and my viewers. If you don't mind, if you can give our listeners and viewers just a little bit of just a background on yourself and share your journey with them.
Absolutely. So approximately 10 years ago, we got started in investing in real estate. Both of us were very fortunate to have a good financial start in our careers, and we wanted to figure out what was the best investment for that capital to provide long-term wealth building of strategies we wanted to, implement the rest of our lives. And Kyle actually looked into a lot of different sectors and stumbled on real estate. And once we found real estate, we haven't looked back. We've been investing in small rental properties, high-end flips, and then most recently we've transitioned into large multifamily properties.
Awesome. Now, one of the things that I'll share with my listeners and viewers here too, that these two are phenomenal athletes. That's their background. So Ashley played some field hockey, and we've got a lot of South Africans and Aussies and folks out there. They know the sport very well. And Kyle actually played in the NHL ice hockey. So both hockey on different surfaces, being athletes. If you guys don't mind speaking a little bit to bringing sports into business, the mindset that you brought in and how that has helped you guys.
Honestly, nothing has prepared us more for this life, being entrepreneurs, having your own company, than the foundation that playing on all these different teams provided for us. Because at the end of the day, you can go further with a team, and a team is made up of a lot of different positions. And ultimately, that's the same approach we take with real estate. And as long as you have experts in every single position, you're poised very well to have a championship team, so to speak. And that's what our ultimate goal is. We don't pretend to be experts in everything. We really focus on being an expert in our specific role. And then we partner with other people who are experts in their roles, because we find that that is the best approach to take.
And just to expand on that too a little bit, I guess hard work instilled in that as well from coming from sports, and that especially in crunch time when you have to all of a sudden just work really hard for a short period or for like a get things done, and that's really transitioned well too.
Yeah, and I feel like it's and what you guys do well too is focusing on the process, right, and working through that. And I think that, as you guys know, you can have different types of plans and strategies. Like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, like going into a game, this is what we're going to do. These are the looks that we're going to show them. And then all of a sudden, they've prepared just as well. So you have to adapt and adjust on the fly and regroup and figure it out. I think like that type of, it's almost like the little huddle fix, right? On the spot, under high pressure, really prepares you for everything that's flying at you, for all the phone calls and all the emails that you're going to get, as a real estate entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I think that the more you prepare yourself, the better equipped you are to handle anything that comes up in the moment. And we do a lot of education through listening to podcasts, reading, attending seminars. I mean, we are always, I like to say, in beta mode. So we're always trying to learn and get better. I would never say that we'll ever be in a place where we could consider ourselves set in anything, because if anything is sure in life, it's that everything changes, the markets change, what you should be investing in changes. I mean, there's so many different nuances to life that is the second that you think that you're at the top and you can settle, that's the moment that someone or something really surprises you and overpasses you.
Yeah, it's almost there's a mentor of mine that had this phrase. He called it the arrival syndrome, where he said where it amazes him, it blows his mind that folks, you know, like let's just say they go to high school or they go to college and they get a certificate and they're like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm good. I've arrived at knowledge. I know everything I need to know now. This is great. You know, where it's constant that pursuit of excellence and honing your craft daily, because things are changing. And at the time of this recording, things are chaotic and the environment is chaotic. So if you've got a solid strategy, there's tactical things that you can adjust to and change to. But good strategies work in up-down markets that go up, down, and sideways, right? Let's dive into the real estate side of it a little bit. So if you guys don't mind sharing a little bit an overview of the business. So there's some flips that's going on, and you're transitioning over to multifamily. What I've seen, and one of the reasons why this intrigues me, and maybe our listeners and viewers will learn too, is what I've seen with successful folks too, is there's a driver of liquidity, something that generates the cash to then invest and scale something else, right? So one business generates liquidity and cash, like maybe the flips, and then it's invested and grown into a larger portfolio of multifamilies. But I'll give you guys the floor if you want to touch a little bit on some of the stuff that you're up to.
So we've been in flipping for approximately, well, I would say 5.5, going on 6 years now. And we have done everything from smaller houses to $1 million houses. We have found our niche in this space because we focused on full gut rehabs. And we like older homes. So we positioned ourselves well to eliminate competition, because there's a lot of competition in the Philadelphia suburbs. So with respect to that company, we were building that company up and expanding, and then we're constantly doing market research. And what we identified is that the market would not withstand us continuing to build out that company. So we've actually scaled down that company. We still have several projects going on currently.
The 1% grow their business and investments every year, regardless of the economy and marketplace, and pay very little or no taxes legally. Besides having the right mindset, elite strategies and tactics, and the council of elite wealth advisors, coaches, and mentors, they have access to opportunities that the rest of the population do not. If you're an accredited investor, we have a network that provides Cashflow Ninja listeners access to exclusive business and investment opportunities. To join our investors network, please apply at cashflowninjainvestorsnetwork.com. That's cashflowninjainvestorsnetwork.com.
But our focus a few years ago shifted to multifamily. We've always been intrigued by multifamily with Kyle and his career playing professionally overseas for 4 years. That gave us a lot of time to educate ourselves on multifamily and positioned us well for when we returned back to the States for us to jump in with a solid foundation. And that's exactly what we did. So we moved into the multifamily sector a little over 2 years ago. Since then, we've invested passively on a deal. We are GPing on 2 other large apartments, and then we've now built out our own company, and actually we're currently in best and final in 2 large apartment buildings in Houston. So that's really been our focus over the past 6 or 7 years. As I mentioned before, we did a few things before the flipping, but ultimately I would say our two main focuses over our investing career have been in flipping and multifamily.
And you talked about earlier about pivoting strategy. It's one of those things where once we started to see how late in the cycle we are, and whether you believe when the recession's coming or when not, and you look at how the performance of different assets do in, you know, a recessionary time, high-end flipping isn't the best performing thing during a recession. Versus if you look at large multifamily, especially when you stay in the working class, then you know, occupancies typically don't take a you know, very hard hit, you know, depending on which market you're in. And it's usually a pretty stable asset class to go through a recession. So once we noticed that, we thought, okay, whether or not we can predict when the recession's coming, we do believe it's coming at some point. And if we can be, you know, in a different, you know, put our time and our capital in a different different spot than just that high-end flipping, then that's probably more prudent to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And over the course of 6 to 7 years, and what I've seen too is, you know, as you mentioned before, learning is so important, and mentorship and the network that we're in, there's phenomenal people to learn from, right? And eventually partner on too. So one of the questions that folks might have, so is what markets are you guys in? You'd mentioned Texas, a market in Texas. What are you looking at there? What's attractive for you in those markets? And what do you see going on there?
We really like the Houston market a lot because it actually has a lot of different factors that we look for in terms of investing that are very favorable to us. First and foremost is one thing I believe in is investing in a recession-resistant market. And I've come up with my own way of identifying how I believe a market is recession-resistant. The first step is looking at what are the top 3 to 5 economic drivers of that market. If any of those drivers are tied to tourism or are tourism, I think that that market is not poised well to sustain a recession, because obviously, as we all know, the first thing to take a hit during a recession is tourism. The next thing that we look at is we look at unemployment rate, and we look at that over the last recession, because fortunately there's a lot of data from the last recession to look at pre-employment rates during the recession, how long it took to stabilize the unemployment, and then post-recession unemployment rates, and how that unemployment rate has bounced back. Obviously, that's over 10 years ago at this point when the recession hit in 2008, and there are a lot of other factors that have come into play since then, other industries that have entered and exited the market. But ultimately, what we're looking at is we're looking at the differential between the height of unemployment, the low of unemployment, and figuring out how long it took to rebound. And we have our own metrics for identifying whether or not that is a strong market or not. Houston falls into being a proven recession-resistant market. Historically, people think of Houston as, you know, the oil and gas driver of the U.S., and that is in an historical sense true, but there have been a lot of other industries that have entered the Houston market space, frankly, over the past 10 years, one of which is technology, 2 is medical. There are just so many other industries that have poised themselves to be very successful in Houston because they see migration path towards Houston, the affordability of Houston, and then also too, in terms of Houston is very interesting where it doesn't have any zoning requirements in the Houston MSA, so you can build anything you want on land. It's not limited by multifamily or residential zoning. So I think, you know, when we look at a city like Pittsburgh and people think of that as a historically steel town, I think a lot of people are kicking themselves today, realizing that quietly all of these other industries entered the market, and now Pittsburgh is considered one of the top cities to invest in now, and you kind of missed the boat if you weren't following all these industries entering Pittsburgh. We've been following the industries that are entering Houston, and we believe Houston is set up to do very well, even given the current situation that's going on with the oil. So, that's one market we're very bullish on right now.
Just, and even Texas in general, like people, if you watch the migration patterns, everybody's moving southwest. All the jobs are moving south. Texas, obviously with the no income tax, very business friendly. Everyone kind of saw what happened with Dallas. Now it's happening in Austin, where everything's becoming a little bit overbuilt, a little bit overinvested. And Houston and San Antonio have been a little bit more stable. Houston has its own economy, its own cycles that aren't necessarily just tied to the national cycles. And we think there's still opportunity there versus, Dallas and Austin. Maybe you have missed vote a little bit. So that's another reason.
Yeah. And in Houston, especially in the Woodlands, watch out for all of those South Africans living there. No, it's a great market. So what type of properties were you guys looking at once you've identified the market and you're looking at what type of properties do you look at, and what type of deals do you guys look at?
Ideally, we look at anything above 125 units. In terms of getting an economy of scale, 125 positions you well to still have one, we like to say, in the multifamily industry, one in, one out, which means one in the leasing office and then one maintenance headcount on payroll. Payroll is one of your harder hits to your NOI in terms of your expenses. So in terms of getting that economies of scale of maximizing the number of units per head count, that's something we look at. The larger properties are obviously more beneficial when you look at economies of scale, and also too, they have their own community. It really depends on the inner pockets that you're looking to invest and what type of properties people like. We are very granular at how we look at different submarkets of Houston to identify what types of properties are most advantageous, and we look at Houston as a whole in terms of the MSA to identify where the path of progression is going, and we've identified that, and therefore those are the markets that we're very excited about because of different drivers like good school districts that are just continuing to put a lot of money into the buildings and the education. And we're a firm believer that real estate is very driven by school systems.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the things that you guys are doing to mitigate risks in the current environment? Carl mentioned, the economic cycle or the market cycle, determining where we are in managing tactically or risks too. What are some of the things that you've put into the underwriting?
I mean, you, as I said, we can't predict exactly when the recession is going to hit. All you can kind of say is, it's coming.
Yep.
And so when you're modeling your underwriting for a property, you just model in that it's not going to be just because last year had 5% rent growth. I'm not putting 5% rent growth for the length of the ownership of the property. At the same time, we hope, or we think that it's going to be relatively short and relatively soon. So in that case, we want to take some longer term debt. With interest rates so low, it's very prudent to tie in some 7, 10, even 12-year debt. And especially with the interest rates being so low, even if we don't see that recession happening and things start to go up, that these loans are assumable, and it makes it very advantageous for an exit if you could say, hey, look, we're selling this property and it comes with a 3.2% interest rate that you can assume on the purchase.
MC Lobshier, the creator of the Cash Flow Ninja and Cash Flow Coach at Producers Wealth, where we help our clients integrate infinite banking with their business and investments. To learn how you can create your own banking system to turbocharge your investments and business in 30 days or less, go to yourownbankingsystem.com. That's yourownbankingsystem.com.
So it kind of hedges your bets that you have that long-term loan, that if something were to happen, then you can ride it all the way back to the end of the next market cycle, and you can exit then, or you can decide, okay, we get to that 3, 4, 5 year mark and nothing has happened, or the market's primed for selling, then you have that very low interest rate to exit as well.
Other things we do too, let's just be very frank. Anyone who tells you that here's an investment and all things are going to go well, even in a strong market, is out of their mind. Let's just take it back to a single family residence. If you own your home or even rent your property, you know that you can't even go a year without having something go wrong. If you extrapolate that across hundreds of units over a multi-year period, you're going to have something go wrong. And that's not even considering market conditions, right? So ultimately, any investment that you make today, you should know at some point there is going to be a recession. It is very unlikely that during the hold of a property that we will go through the entire hold without having some sort of recession. So we are very cognizant of that. That's something we're not hiding from. We're very we just account for it in our underwriting on a lot of different factors. One of which is ensuring that we have enough operating capital, that from day one, a lot of underwriting models, when I look at properties for other people and help them, read between the lines of what the offering is saying, one thing I help them look at is what the starting operating capital is, because ultimately you are going to have some dips, especially the majority of these properties are value add properties, they're repositioning. You need a safety net in that situation. Another thing too that we consider is when the vacancy, or if the vacancy drops, whether you're repositioning or due to a recession and you have people vacating the property, or because you acquired the property and the previous owner put in tenants who aren't qualified to be in there, you want to ensure that you're able to still cover your debt, you're still able to cover your expenses of utilities, keeping the lights on, taxes, all of those required bills that keep the business operating, to ensure that the investment is protected. And ultimately, we put in a lot of safeguards in place to ensure that. That's what we do from an operating standpoint. From a sourcing standpoint, one of the things we look for are properties that have kind of like an ace up the sleeve kind of situation, in the sense that there is some sort of X factor about a property that makes it not just a stereotypical property. So it could be that it has multiple exit strategies. It could be that it has an adjacent land parcel that can be built on that we haven't included in our underwriting at all. It could be that, there's just so many, I can't think like right off the top of my head right now, but any property that we are interested in, it has to have some other play. And that's something we learned, to be honest with you, doing flipping. One of the things you learn very early on is you need to figure out multiple exit strategies. You can't buy a property in flipping and think to yourself, the only exit strategy is flipping, because flipping is very tied to the market, the strength of the market. So if you're in a downturn, you need to be able to either rent it, seller finance it, you become the bank and someone pays down the debt that is owed on the property. There's just a lot of different ways to exit a property, and we take that same lesson we learned in flipping and we apply it on the multifamily side.
Yeah, that's great stuff, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of that, right? And it's so true. And thank you for sharing that. That's a great lesson with all the different exit strategies on a single family, to take the same approach of what can I do with multifamily, because as you mentioned, it's not rainbows and unicorns. Guess what? When you invest in real estate, some people might not not only will they pay their rent late, they might not pay it, period. Stuff might break. I had a conversation with a previous guest where somebody took a car and drove it into one of their properties recently. So these fun things happen. The most important thing is, and this is why it's so important as investors, especially as a passive investor, the operators and their team, like, what are they made of, right? Are these folks that will persist, like just in sports, right? People go down and get hurt. This didn't work out or this failed, but you adapt, you adjust, and you persist and make a success out of it. And those are the folks that become successful and have success with these types of investments and with real estate, because it could be a fantastic vehicle. But it's not, as I mentioned, and you guys mentioned too, it's not just rainbows and unicorns. Now, you mentioned the value adds on some properties, right? And that's built into the plan. And you've mentioned a couple of things of the property having an X factor. What are some of the other things with value add that you guys look at when you look at a property, of things that you can improve upon or improve?
So one thing that really stuck with me is actually something that my mother-in-law, Kyle's mom, said to me, and they're not in the business. It was just, very eye-opening to talk to someone who's not in the business and can kind of give you an outsider's point of view. And one thing that she said to me was looking at a property, not who your buyer is going to be when you sell it, but who their buyer is going to be when they sell it. And that really stuck with me, because it made me think to myself, well, if 2 levels out, there are multiple buyers, if all I focus on 2 levels out, then whoever's interested in my property kind of takes care of itself. So whether that means you leave meat on the bone, which means that you only prove a value add strategy. For example, one property that I'm running right now, we're only doing 80 out of 225 units. We've proven the value add. In fact, we could actually even push the rents further if we wanted to. We're below market comps by about $40 to $50, depending on the unit type. So we know when we go to exit, we've proven this strategy in less than a year, and there's still a lot of room on the property for someone to come in and be interested. Another way that we've looked at a property is, especially in the Houston MSA, going back to the fact that the zoning, really using that to your benefit and saying to yourself, okay, well, what if I don't exit the property as an apartment building, but what if I exit it as individual condos? What if I condo out all the units? If you look at what things are trading for on a case-by-case basis, that's something that you can look at and say to yourself, well, is it more lucrative for me to sell it unit by unit versus collectively, what people are paying for doors? So those are, just 2 ways in which we're doing that. But in terms of the value add, specifically what we're doing is on the interiors, we're typically redoing the flooring, refacing the cabinets or new cabinets, new fixtures, which is inclusive of lighting and plumbing, two-tone paint, which two-tone paint is baseboards white, if they have chair rail white, and then, grayish tan wall color, which seems to still be surviving the latest trends. And then on the exterior, enhancing the amenities, making sure that there's curb appeal, improving the leasing office. The leasing office is someone's first impression on the property, so it should always, in my opinion, be 1 class higher than the rest of the property. So if you have a B-class property, make the leasing office an A-class look, because you never get back that first impression. So really doing that. And then most importantly is your team.
My friend Brian Page has created a cash flow machine generating over $100,000 in 6 months without owning any real estate. His system consists out of renting properties from property owners and renting them out on Airbnb. His system is so simplistic, it can be managed by virtual assistants and yet so effective and powerful that it predictably generates cash flow every month. Brian and I are hosting a webinar where he shares his system and how it generated over $100,000 in 6 months for him personally. You can access this life-changing webinar at cashflowninja.com/BNB. This is one of the greatest cash flow opportunities I've seen since I've started my podcast. Again, the URL is cashflowninja.com/BNB.
Our team on these properties is absolutely incredible. I mean, to be honest with you, you can have a great property, but if you don't have a good team, it doesn't matter how good the property is. It doesn't matter how good the performance is. You need people who can execute.
I mean, number one, I would say that's what sets Ashley and her team apart is operations. And the thing that's happened in multifamily is that you've seen so much cap rate compression that people have been getting rewarded for operating their properties poorly. When you talk about what's the number one value add strategy, the number one way that we can add value to these properties is just by running the properties properly. You see all anybody who bought a multifamily property in the last 5 years, we looked at one the other day that was 55% occupied, and they're asking, sub 4 cap for these properties. So, if the market rate cap is a 5, these people are getting offers sub 4 because they ran their property poorly, and there's so much value add potential. And so what's going to happen is these people aren't going to have learned how to operate a property, but they're going to have made millions of dollars just buying and selling and doing, nothing in between, that they're going to buy the next one. And when there is some sort of recession, they aren't going to know what to do because they've never properly operated it properly. So we come in from day one, focus on operations. Even though there is a property management team in place, Ashley's on the phone with the property management team daily about these properties, checking up on them. And that focus, I believe, even though operations is important, when you hit a recession time and things aren't going well, it's the most important thing, because it could be the difference between you getting still churning out returns to your investment and into your investors, or losing the property to the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys mentioned the importance of a team and a strong team constantly, and you guys are a power couple, a great team. Can you guys share some of the success? Because I think a lot of our listeners might ask too, how has it been being in business with your spouse? And what are some of the success that you guys can share? Some of the things that have worked for you guys in having the success in your business.
I think in terms of working together, I think we had a good foundation to start because of the fact that the way Kyle's career, his initial career as a professional hockey player was situated, and we just lived in close quarters a lot of time, and we were in Europe together, and it was just the two of us, and there's not a lot of imports over there. It really got us to a whole nother level in our relationship in terms of being able to respect that we have different opinions on things and we look at things from a different viewpoint, but that we both have really good things to offer. And I think we've transitioned that very well into the business, to respect that each of us are talented in two different things. I think it's probably very clear to your listeners by now that Kyle does all of the underwriting, but that doesn't mean that I don't look at the underwriting at all. I focus on operations, so he is very detail oriented when it comes to running the numbers, knowing markets, market data, just every specific number that you could possibly know in a property. And then I come in and I know every number on actually operating it. So in terms of, other partnership groups where you have people working in silos and you have underwriting just handing over a pro forma, giving it to the asset manager to execute. And really the underwriter is trying to like crystal ball this operations of the property. And then the asset manager comes in and, there's discordance between the two. We don't have that because we literally sit next to each other every single day in our office, working together side by side, making sure that everything is very specific and it's as close to actual as possible. So as soon as I see something change in my operations, we incorporate that into our underwriting model. And I think knowing too, who is an expert on something and allowing them to be an expert without challenging it, and respecting each other's lane, I think that has boded very well for us too, because there are certain things where, I know in operations, this is how it's going to be. And I really don't care what the national average is per door on underwriting for payroll, for example. This is what it is in this market. I'm telling you, this is what it is. And this is what the vacancy is. These are things that Kyle and I talk about on a day-to-day basis when we're underwriting properties. And likewise, when we get properties and Kyle says to me, this property isn't going to pencil out, I know, okay, well then we shouldn't spend 2 hours underwriting something when we could be moving on to the next property because he's underwritten so many. There are a couple that I push him on. That's why he gave me that look there. Because there are some where I'm just like, no, I think this will work, but at the end of the day, we have to respect that we each know our role, and we have to trust that the other person, is really looking out for the best interests of both of us, which is really easy when you're married to someone, because when we win, we both win, so that's helpful.
Yeah, it's still a partnership. So the thing is, the problem that people get into when partnering with their spouse, if they wouldn't have made a good partner if you weren't spouses, then they're still not going to make a good partner, and it's probably even going to be worse. So we have complementary skill sets, as I'm sure you could probably tell. She's more of the extrovert and able to talk to anybody and very well-spoken, and I'm kind of more the sit behind a desk, numbers monkey guy. But so we complement each other in that way. But partnering with your spouse also gives you opportunities in the sense that you can structure your life the way you want to. We have 2 small children, and we can, always be able to be available for anything that they need us for. So that's obviously a huge plus as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we mentioned the importance of learning and being lifelong learners. And one of the habits I've observed from wealthy and successful people is that they're always learning and studying new things. What are you guys studying and learning currently?
So I've been reading a different book, trying to read a different book on a weekly basis every week. It's a little bit difficult sometimes when we're working until 11, 12 o'clock and then starting up again at 6 a.m. Right now. But I like to do a mix of different types of books. I don't believe that you can't learn anything from a newbie investor, so to speak. In fact, I think you actually learn more because people aren't tainted in the appropriate things to say. They're not afraid to tell you their biggest mistakes, and they're also not afraid to say something that's so obvious. The other day, I actually said to Kyle, there's an entrepreneur magazine that has been on my bedside table for over a year now. And what's interesting about it is that when I read it, there was so much information in this one article. I literally thought to myself, if I read this at a different time, I'm probably going to take away something different in this article than reading it today. And then, 3 months from now and 3 months after that. And I think that is the point of educating yourself constantly, because I was a psychology major in undergrad, and one of the things they talked about is the rate of diagnosis increases when a physician has read something recently that that person ends up getting diagnosed with. Some people could call that a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're trying to push someone into, you know, a category maybe that wasn't a disease. But the alternative way of looking at it is that for rare disease, unless it's on the forefront of your mind, I mean, every single day we have such inbound of information coming at us through social media, TV, everything that's going on in the world. And in order for our brains to process all this information, we have to create so many different synapses that are tying together the information that oftentimes information gets lost. So in order to keep that information fresh, reading books, I read specific books on the topic of apartment investing, like for example, Brian Murray's book on Crushing It. And then I'll read something like Outliers, or I'll read something like How to Estimate Rehab Costs. Even though I already know how to do this stuff, it's just to constantly keep information on, you know, like in the forefront of my mind.
I have a tough time reading these days because the problem is that we live in a time where there's such a wealth of information out there. And I used to read a ton of books. I used to love it. That was information junkie, and but the problem is now that it's so accessible to get information, and something like a podcast, like it's so easy for me to be listening to podcasts while I'm at the gym, or, you know, like I literally just got off the bike when I came down here, and like, so you can absorb all of this information in different ways. Now, you know, book on tape is this kind of the same thing. I guess tape, it's not tape anymore, but you know, an audio book. So I'm just constantly listening to podcasts, you know, taking in there's more podcasts to listen to every day than I have time in the day. So even if I listen to your podcast every single episode, it would take me weeks. And there's so many good podcasts out there that I just am constantly taking in the information that way. And then between that and doing market research and keeping up with what's going on in the economy these days, like it's difficult for me to actually read books. So I would say I would de facto to that. I'm just a podcast junkie right now is what I do.
Life settlement investments have allowed financial and banking institutions to not only buy their equity contractually, but also diversify their capital from any economic, market, and geopolitical risk. It's been part of the billion-dollar blueprint followed by institutional investors. And if you're an accredited investor, you can also now participate in this vehicle with enormous growth potential. You can watch an informational webinar presented by one of the premier organizations providing life settlement investments, Penumbra Solutions, at cashflowninja.com/life settlements.
No, I can relate to that too, because when you're moving constantly, your downtime is, let's just say, you know, especially with kids, we're in the same situation as you guys with the two young kids. In your downtime, you're like, well, I've got to, you know, go for a run or do this or do that, and I'll just throw something in my ears, and it'll be a podcast or it'll be, you know, an audio book or something like that. So I can definitely relate to that, and I can relate to what Ashley said too about, you know, the doctors after they've read something that they're now diagnosing that, you know, because just think about it, if there's some symptom that you have, right, and you climb on the internet these days, you're like, oh, I've got like a pain, you know, a back pain or this, it ends with you're going to die, basically.
Yep.
Right?
I went through I literally thought I was going to die for about 15 minutes at one point. I was planning, you know, like how my accounts were transferring to my wife, and we had a kid on the way at the time. Like it's scary.
Yep. Yeah, I was there too, and it all started with a headache, you know.
5 minutes later, you're like, it's all over.
I'm out. So now our core message in our show is to leave our families, communities, and the world better than we found by passing down a mindset, values, and principles to future generations, not just money. So if you guys cannot pass on any money to future generations, and we're only allowed to pass on 3 principles to them to build wealth and achieve happiness and success, what would they be?
Knowledge is power. To never give up, and to be kind.
Very powerful stuff there. Anything you wanted to add, Kyle?
I would like my whole life. I just pass it over to her, and she's the we have two beautiful girls, and just her being the role model and living through her, I'm pretty confident that they're going to grow up to be amazing people.
Awesome stuff. Awesome. Where can folks learn more about you? Where can they follow you? Where can they stay in touch? And where can they reach out to you guys if they want to have conversations about the Texas market and some of the projects that you guys are involved in?
So we have a landing page. It's called Badash Investor. So BADASHINVESTOR.com. And from there, you can link off to our other companies like Ace High Partners and our flipping company. So from there, you can also contact us directly. But
you can find her on Instagram too, Badash Investor.
Yes,
on Instagram. Yeah, love that, by the way. And that's you're involved with a lot of stuff too. If folks are in the Philadelphia area or even New Jersey, there's meetups, some of the investor meetups, right?
Correct. So I am affiliated with the InvestHer group. So anyone listening, just to make sure that's INVESTHER. That group is nationwide. There are some locations also in Canada. Most of the meetups are on Meetup. So if you go to Meetup and look in your area, you can find InvestHer on the realestateinvesther.com. On Facebook, there's the InvestHer community. There are monthly meetups in most local regions in the country. If there isn't one in your location, however you would like to organize one, you can get in touch with me or the founders of InvestHer, and they will help you set up the local meetup. But all of the information is free. It's a very supportive community. There's no upsell. It's a very strong, powerful community. The wealth of knowledge of the women that are in this group is quite profound. So you can really find any resource you need within that group.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I would highly recommend folks check that out. You guys are up to some amazing stuff with that, with the investor community, and it's grown. It's quite incredible to see the growth of where it started, and it keeps growing. So fantastic stuff. Guys, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for connecting. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey and providing so much value for all of my listeners and viewers out there.
Thank you so much for having us.
This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation, and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.